Good evening, everybody. Tonight we have the honor of having Lucas Schwamman from Simple Mining on. Gonna go ahead and introduce you there, Lucas. If you want to give us a little bit of your background and then tell us about Simple Mining.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me tonight. Everybody okay with seeing my screen so far?
We're good.
Perfect. So yeah, my name is Lucas Schwamman. I was actually born and raised in Cresco, Iowa. Currently living in Cedar Falls. Always had a passion for technology since I was a kid. Never was really too interested in school. And then ultimately graduated out of Osage here in Iowa. After graduating high school, kind of had the interest to potentially go play sports in college or to continue the traditional technology route, but ended up going with none of them and actually just went straight into the workforce right after high school. And with that, I had moved to Cedar Falls and I had started kind of essentially a cell phone repair business, where I joined into a cell phone repair business that was established and watched that grow from one store here in Cedar Falls, Iowa, to seven stores across the state. Learning micro soldering and about any other device repair you can think of, anything that was electronic based. During COVID, we kind of had some uncertainty about the economy and didn't know if that was going to continue to scale from a cell phone repair business and a retail store location aspect. And so we actually, probably just like a lot of people on the news during COVID, there was this big crypto boom. There was a lot more interest and easier kind of access into this crypto market. Um, and after doing some research and kind of that heavy um, call it love for technology, we started to learn about like the crypto mining aspect of it. So in the back of a cell phone repair store, we had just about 50 little GPUs, are what they are called. And they are actually pretty commonly found. They are just what are mostly used in residential, like home PCs, mostly used for like gaming or any high computing power processing that is required by a computer. And we had 50 of those running in basically the utility closet of our cell phone repair store, just getting our feet wet, learning about the technology. But ultimately, that was mining what is called a crypto coin called Ethereum. After doing even more research and really kind of going down what I would call like the rabbit hole about Bitcoin, we kind of learned that there's a big difference between what we kind of refer to, at least internally, as like there's Bitcoin and then there's kind of everything else. There's a lot of crypto coins that can just pop up out of nowhere. And so Bitcoin was kind of like the one and only to be dedicating any time and effort into. So with that being said, we ultimately kind of grew out of this cell phone repair store utility closet and secured basically a power purchase agreement from a utility provider here in Cedar Falls. And what that allowed us to do is essentially start what we call simple mining. This crypto mining space is really kind of the still in the wild west of like this young industry. And our kind of goal was to be able to offer a service that we can take every little aspect that we learned from these cell phone repair stores of the ABCs of business, from customer service, high quality uptime and communication and transparency, with that transparency being the big key, because again, it's a brand new industry. How do you trust people that say that they can do this? It's not very mature yet. So in 2021, we secured that power purchase agreement. And that we got pretty lucky on. Normally, when you are securing those, you're going to have to agree to be able to purchase a large amount of power. And at that point in time, it was just me and my CEO, Adam, and we were able to basically grow without putting like too much risk on ourselves or on the utility partner that we were purchasing it from. And so we were able to purchase 1 megawatt of power. That was just enough for us to put up essentially what we manufactured and like kind of fabricated ourselves. It was one container. It would hold up to 96 of these computers. And then we were able to just kind of scale from our 50 up to those 96 and then not overcommit ourselves to anything. And we did see some success in those first containers to be able to kind of purchase a couple megawatts more, build a couple more containers, sell a couple more computers, and run those. With kind of a goal of getting like 5 megawatts in 5 years. 2023 happens. We're able to open up our second data center. At that point in time, we had scaled from that 50 to about 4,000 computers. 2024, we energized our third data center, which is actually where I'm at today. It's attached to our office. That also includes a repair facility. That repair facility was actually one of the biggest kind of helpers in this business, because not only are we responsible for operating and running these computers, but anytime that those computers fail, we're able to repair them right here in Iowa. With other kind of, call it, competitors or industry standards, it's shipping those computers across the world, across the country, for somebody to be able to repair them, ship them back. You're basically sitting at weeks or months worth of downtime on these computers, which ultimately is not really scalable and just like sustainable overall. Fast forward 2025, 2026, we are at 10 data centers online. We did surpass our 50 megawatt goal and milestone. So today we are sitting roughly at 40,000 of these computers online, 150 megawatts of power, with about 60% of that coming from renewable energies. Thankfully, all of 10 of these data centers are here in Iowa. That gives us access to that energy source. This year alone, we received our second Inc. 5000 award, and that is for the fastest growing businesses in the United States. We were the number one growing business in Iowa for the past 2 years. So a little bit about the actual details of Simple Mining is these are not traditional data centers that you may see in the news or online. They're not 50,000 square foot facilities with its own power generation and a lot of backup power generations. Not any huge, water coolers and water tanks. What these essentially are, to try to simplify it, is they're basically prefabricated shipping containers and modular data centers. So everybody hopefully can see kind of this image that's on screen of what one of these data centers typically look like. The actual, footprint for these is, call it a quarter of an acre normally, like at most. Of course, the bigger of a scale you get, the more computers you can house. But this is on average what like a simple mining data center would look like. Next kind of picture I want to show you guys is, what do these computers actually look like? You guys hear Bitcoin miners. Miners are just a different name for these computers. Here's two examples of what these computers typically look like. On the left side of my screen, I have what is referred to as like an air-cooled computer or a Bitcoin miner. As you can see, there's two fans on the front, with a couple on like that side power supply. So that is just responsible for intaking ideally cold air, but it's ambient air. And then there's the exact same replication of those fans on the back side of it that is not pictured, and that would be referred to as kind of like the exhaust side. On the right side of the screen is what we would refer to as like a hydro or a liquid cooled computer. As you can see, there's just two essentially inlets, and that is going to intake your liquid. It's running it through this computer, and then it's outtaking the what is now warm liquid. Um, Think of the liquid miners or these hydro cooled, liquid cooled modular like data centers. It's essentially a big car radiator. There's a lot of kind of sometimes misinformation in the news or online about how much water is getting like wasted at these data centers. But for the Bitcoin mining data centers, it's actually false. It's going to be, like I said, this radiator. We're sure you may have some like leaks here and there, but it's not like you are, drilling water out of the ground, using it one time and then wasting it. It's all just in this one gigantic closed loop circuit, essentially, just like a radiator. And it's also, especially here in Iowa, it's not even just flat water. It is essentially a glycose mix. Of course, in the wintertime, the temperatures ambient will become freezing or well below freezing. So water as a cooling source would essentially freeze. So hopefully that kind of paints the pictures and can illustrate exactly what these computers and these Bitcoin miners look like. Next is kind of something that everybody here can relate to and comprehend. This is the electrical infrastructure of what these data centers will essentially use. So, as you saw in that picture of that data center, these modular Bitcoin mining data centers are going to be basically as close to the source of power as possible, not only from a cost perspective, but just like that resource perspective, where you're essentially sticking them next to substations. There's a lot of excess land, typically, at least here in Iowa, next to those. And it's kind of a perfect win-win for those modular containers to go next to. So, of course, the substation is outputting high voltage. It's going down into a voltage transformer, then to another pad mount transformer. Of course, those cables then are coming from a transformer into a panel box, then into a power distribution unit, which we refer to just for short as a PDU. Then it goes into the ASIC miner's power supply itself there. Again, that is going to be referenced as that computer. And ultimately, without diving too much into the software side of it right now, those computers are used to mine and generate Bitcoin in this use case. Of course, everybody here is familiar with solar energy. In Iowa, we have great access to solar and then even more dominantly wind production and energy. A lot of people probably like myself live or grow up or grew up in like the northern part of Iowa. I'll use a good example here of like Charles City, Iowa. They are tons of windmills kind of right around the highway. A lot of the times, though, those windmills aren't spinning. And the reason for that is essentially just because they already have the excess energy, or there is excess energy. They already have the energy produced that they need to be able to serve that community or the grid at whole. And so they'll just turn off those windmills because there's nobody essentially to use that energy. Um, a lot of depending on the utilities, will be able to sell that back to essentially like another grid supplier. Um, but yeah, just kind of wanted to go into the basics here in Iowa for how much excess energy we're actually producing. And that is how these essentially power purchase agreements, but how these Bitcoin mining data centers are able to operate. When the data center, or excuse me, when the utility has excess power, these data centers are using the electricity, which would otherwise be wasted or like sold back off to the grid for pennies on the dollar. And so, what we're able to do with like this Bitcoin mining data center power load is fluctuate very, very quickly. It's essentially, and of course, it's a little bit biased, but it can act as like one of the world's greatest batteries, where as soon as it's all supply and demand. So like on the hottest days of the summer, coldest days of the winter, if somebody like a city is turning on their AC or their furnaces, and there's this kind of spike on the utility grid, we are able to drop all of our power load within a matter of minutes. It's a kind of a very fascinating technology side of this kind of power demand and what we refer to as demand response. Where if a utility was to go to a factory or a foundry, such as like John Deere or any of these large manufacturing plants, they're not going to be able to just stop their operation in a matter of minutes or probably even hours. These data centers, again, there's going to be a much better use case for that the power on the grid than a Bitcoin mining data center. So we're able to just drop that load within a matter of minutes. Same thing when that curve were to resolve itself, we can power back up when things become operational again, essentially. So This is completely different from the AI data centers. So I do want to kind of point that out here as well. So the AI data centers are essentially asking for and getting power agreements that are uninterruptible. So it's constant power. It doesn't matter what were to happen in the grid. Those AI data centers are going to be turned on that Bitcoin mining side, we refer to it as demand response as the action, but we call it the actual power load, curtailable load. Again, just allows any utility provider to be able to send us signals automatically and fluctuate with the demand and supply. So that is essentially kind of what I had prepared for you guys from the power side. And what Simple Mining is doing today, I do want to kind of briefly talk about it, even though I don't have any great pictures for it, is the actual like residential or home use for these like Bitcoin miners. I know Lauren had mentioned that there may be some interest in like how can you reuse this heat, right? If you're not using this like liquid cooled mining, or even if you are, this air in this heat is going somewhere, right? And a lot of the times, no matter what company you're looking at, is probably wasting that heat. There's a few use cases even here at like Simple Mining where that heat will be reused, whether that's for a shop building, whether that's for an office. There's so many different applications for it. Um, but that is 100% a real like possibility where you could not require a gigantic substation to run these. You could run these on 110 volts if you wanted to, and you're not going to get as much computing power out of them. But again, at the end of the day, if the entire goal isn't to mine the most amount of Bitcoin possible, but it's to just generate heat that is also technically on the side generating what could be turned into dollars, people will implement that as a real life application. So definitely want to throw that idea out there and be open for any questions that you guys may have. Other than that, I'll probably open it up to a Q&A if you guys have any, if that's all right, Lauren.
I can start off with the first question there. If say like my new shop, if I wanted to put a setup in, is that something you guys do, or I would have to kind of go solo, or and then if I do that, what could I expect for cost?
Yeah, so Simple Mining probably isn't going to like send a technician out there to install it. I'll kind of put a bow on Simple Mining there, where to really simplify like what is Simple Mining, and I know I didn't really go into the software side of this Bitcoin mining process. Definitely willing to answer any questions if there are any, but we essentially act as like a hotel for computers is kind of a decent way to think about it, where it's like we are taking a lot of risk out of it for like how much Bitcoin we're mining as a company. But it's like we're selling these computers, we're building the data centers, we're hosting these computers inside of and offering like this white glove service, repairing them, keeping that uptime as high as possible. But back to your original question there, Lauren, it's definitely something that a lot of what I would refer to as like tinkerers and hobbyists, which I'm sure a lot of us kind of in this call are. It's almost straightforward enough to be able to kind of do it on your own. There's a lot of resources online. I would always personally be willing to help out with anybody on an installation side, on a software and automation side, on a hardware purchasing side. So again, just probably not something that like Simple Mining is going to put a label on, but I would always be here as a resource if you guys are interested in. From a cost or a price perspective, it's really about as cheap or as extreme as you want it to be. Again, there's so many different applications. It's all going to more than likely be custom to everybody's use case. Where if you really wanted to, I actually even have some really small ones that run on my desk every single day. You could get started with like a 110 volt little computer, and it's got some fans on it, and you could just try to capture that in a smaller area. On some of like the liquid side, I know personally people that have run their actual like driveways or floors with the actual kind of plumbing required to do that, but they are doing it at a little bit larger scale. Again, there's also even just greenhouses that are just capturing that hot air off of, call it like six of these fans. Um,
Mhm.
my parents have actually just built a new place. It's actually over in Lansing, Iowa. And what we were working on for this winter is basically taking one of these computers, running it off of 110 volts because we're not worried about getting the most computing power out of it. And what we can utilize are like a 3D printer to create a fan shroud. You are able to essentially create a shroud or basically like an HVAC system adapter where you're able to just basically force that hot exhaust air into an existing HVAC system that's already ran throughout the entire house. Again, there's some math involved to make sure that you're getting enough airflow to actually reach like every single room. There's a lot of automations and software that can be in place to, of course, just run at certain times and stuff like that. So I know I kind of answered that very broadly, but hopefully it answered a little bit of the question there, Lauren.
No, I think you're getting the gist of it, and like I said, I appreciate that. That's kind of how this conversation started. Spencer was joking with me about when, building my new shop and that with the in-floor heat and all that, and I want to go that route, but everybody I talked to said make sure you have a backup and all that, so we went ahead and put the backup in there already. But
Yeah,
I,
it
I've
gets
got I've got options that we can add it someday, but
absolutely.
power wise, you mentioned your negotiated price, but how would that compare to like I'm on REC, and when I talk to REC, they're pretty negative towards doing stuff like that. Any
Yeah. So
thought?
that would be essentially when we talk about like cost or like profitability, that is your one of your biggest factors. It's going to be essentially at least on like a residential or even like a commercial side, not like a variable cost. Normally, it's going to be like a flat kilowatt hour rate on the electricity side. I'll kind of give you some examples here from what we see on like this industrial size where these computers, on average, of course, they're getting more and more powerful, but that also makes them a little bit like more efficient over time, just like any other technology. The more that they dive into that hardware, the more that they can get out of them. On average, these computers are anywhere from like 3 to 5,000 watts. So about 3 kilowatts is kind of like the average median of these computers, with the most performance ones being in that 5,000 watt range. If you were to run that. I don't know if you have or if you care to share what like your electricity rates are. I would imagine they could be anywhere from 10 to 16 cents probably in Iowa, depending on kind of how much and what you're doing it, if it's a commercial kind of agreement or not. But like at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, the daily cost to run one of these computers at, call it 3,000 watts flat, or let's just do 3,500 watts flat, is going to be about $8 a day at 10 cents per kilowatt hour. The return on that, well, one, if you were to just solely care about using it for heat, you'd be able to kind of just do some quick comparisons for what is the power pull for a normal, call it water furnace or any sort of furnace. And then that Bitcoin price can kind of play as another very kind of volatile, I guess is the best word to describe it as this variable for like what is it worth, right? If it's just for the heat, then it's a quick comparison of like, okay, $8 a day at 3,500 watts at 10 cents a kilowatt hour versus a furnace at this many watts. But then you can always throw in that variable of like, okay, if I'm going to generate a couple of dollars of Bitcoin a day, it brings a whole nother formula into the equation where it's like, am I going to sell this Bitcoin every single day into US dollars? Am I going to hold on to it as like an investment in a portfolio piece where it's like, I'm going to eat that cost every single day and never get a true return on it besides the heat. But then in the future, if Bitcoin were to continue to go on the path that it's kind of on, where it were to rise, let's say it hits new all-time highs in the next couple of years, all of that you were technically maybe mining at like a loss or eating the cost on could pay itself off over a longer period.
All right, thanks for that. Anybody else got
Yeah,
questions or?
uh, Lucas Al here over in Charles City, and which a lot of them windmills are surrounding some of my farms up there. And that you had it earlier. Okay, first the question is, what you're doing, is there anything proprietary about that?
I wouldn't say so. Besides probably on like the software stack,
Uh-huh.
in like the operation. These data centers, at least from this Bitcoin mining industry, is again it's a very nerdy and like technology based industry, so everybody is trying to essentially like open source this information. There is some proprietary stuff on the hardware, but that kind of gets outside of like a simple mining scope, and that would be on like this manufacturer scope, right? I would imagine that a lot of you guys start to experience this just in the farming industry. What if you had a tractor that's brand new, that's starting to fail or need a repair? Of course, there's probably a warranty on it, but it's not as simple as like, hey, I know that this is a $10 part and I know how to swap it out. But if I do that, it's going to void the warranty out. So
Mhm.
that hardware in the manufacturing of these computers is still very like closed source proprietary. It's happening overseas. They don't want a bunch of people to be ripping them apart and reverse engineering them. But at the end of the day, it is what happens. And then people are open sourcing that information. Again, it's like how am I able to repair these? There was no information 5 6 years ago when this first started. We would sit down with pen and paper and draw our own schematics with a multimeter. We would digitize these schematics, and be able to create these training manuals. But I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent there on some of the reverse engineering and like that proprietary, but hopefully that answers a little bit of it. I'm definitely open to another follow up if you have one.
Yeah, my other follow up is on your first question, video, screenshots you had there. I look like I see a substation, and with
Yep.
your containers right beside the substation. The question is, I got one of them substations right at the corner of my property, and I know, well, that's an REC substation, Corn Belt. Would they be receptive to participating on this? I don't really know if the energy from the windmills goes to that substation or if it kind of feeds into the Charles City proper. Eventually, there's going to be a fiber optics cable coming down that railroad just west of Charles City by the ethanol plant that's going to be able to fiber optics take that energy to Chicago, wherever.
Right.
Yeah, and
It's definitely possible, right? The biggest thing will be essentially like how much transmission these substations have. Um,
mhm,
and it's all on like the cable sizing, and then what these like step down transformers will be able to actually produce.
yeah.
Definitely possible. From an internet side, of course, having that fiber makes it even easier. It's really was fascinating when we first got into this. There's not a ton that goes into those, like we saw in that earlier picture. It's like you need power, you need the container
Mhm,
infrastructure, you need the computers, and then you need internet.
mhm.
The actual internet usage on it is really low. You could actually run some of these smaller data centers off of satellite, just
Sure.
for a knowledge standpoint there. But it's always possible. I know that essentially it just comes down to a lot of that sizing stuff, and then of course that the power pricing, and then where the REC is actually a part of, like what grid they're actually a part of on a much larger scale.
Mhm.
A lot of basically almost every single one of our facilities or data centers is connected to a utility, but then those utilities are connected to what is called MISO. Um,
Yeah, as far as I know, it's Corn Belt Power,
yep.
and they're probably affiliated with Dairyland up in southern Minnesota, gets into Wisconsin, and we're all part of that big grid. And my other kind of follow-up question is, so what's the play? Is there an opportunity for Ag Ventures itself to invest in this? Maybe do the Midwest grain processors find the perfect spot for one of these centers, in northern Iowa or wherever, and or accredited investors, could we do a portion of this to make these happen?
Definitely. I won't probably go into too much detail right now, but that's definitely a possibility. There's so many probably opportunities realistically, whether that's like running the computers, whether that's just finding and sourcing the power that's required for these, like you mentioned, um, kind of becoming like that investor of maybe sections of the containers or the containers at large. So yeah, definitely a possibility. And if you guys need I'd be more than happy to drop like an email or a phone number here as well.
Okay.
Well, speaking of ethanol
This
plants,
Joe.
would Lawler be reusing some of the heat then? Is that why they put the one by Lawler ethanol?
They aren't currently, but it's a possibility. That one, if you have driven by it, we are probably still roughly a mile or so away from that. And that one is going to be an air cooled facility. So that would just require quite a bit of kind of essentially like HVACing to be able to
Yep.
transfer that airflow there. So right now it is not utilizing that.
Well, likewise at Golden Grain in Mason City, they had that turbine plant that they've shut down. Um,
Yes.
yeah.
Joe, I
So
think
yeah,
you had a question.
It's an interesting discussion. I've heard about your company just here in the neighborhoods because Osage is where I hail from originally, and just between that and school board stuff. But yeah, I assume you know Mark Kingland.
I don't think so. Just for some
Okay, so
clarity, I
Mark
was only in Osage for about 2 years.
So Mark Kingland is with Heartland Power Board of Directors and is the current chair of Dairyland. So I've had
Gotcha.
this conversation with him, and he kind of gave me that education, which I was glad to see. Your presentation did a good job of laying out maybe the differences, because frankly, the mass population, Bitcoin mining, data center, they're all the same. In
Yep.
reality, they're not. And understanding with MISO um, how our MISO grid is really in the next decade projected to be one of the most unstable grids out there compared to California, even was rather eye opening. So, understanding that from him and some of those presentations, and coming to realize how something like a Bitcoin mining facility can actually inherently add to grid stability just because of that light switch off on. I'm at an ethanol plant. I know the peak alerts. It is a hour, 2 hour process with advance notice when those are projected to come on to shut part of the plant down. And, that's an economic choice too. Is it worth running the plant versus paying the extra, electrical demand charges, et cetera? So, I mean, that's stuff large businesses are doing. So, I'm glad you're focusing on that, because there's a lot of education to be done on knowing the differences there between them. The data centers are a whole nother animal out there. Currently,
Absolutely.
here in northern Iowa, we're seeing 4 extremely large generators a week going through from Wisconsin to Texas to act as backup generators for the data centers that are getting built down there. And these generators are one of the largest ones I've ever seen on transport. So that power demand and constant power usage is there, whereas what you're doing does not have that requirement. Um, Related to what you're doing and how you started, I forget the term, but Kevin Kimley with Bitcorn which I've got a node of now and still trying to figure out what in the heck I do with that thing. So that's a learning process. But he mentioned there is a small, like handheld, almost like Raspberry Pi size little mini miner out there that he was experimenting with and connecting that to his node. Do you have any commentary on that as a, starting point into this world?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought it up. And yeah, thank you for some of the context there on kind of what we see in northern Iowa there. Yeah, hopefully that clarifies some of it. But on the what I would call a mini miner or a home miner or this like pocket sized miner, I have actually got quite a few of them. I run them right here on my desk at work, I run them at home. It is probably one of the more beneficial kind of pieces of hardware that you can purchase to really exercise and engage into this Bitcoin mining world. They are really inexpensive compared to the industrial size hardware. You can get brand new ones for anywhere from like $50 to $150. You plug them in, they require essentially 12 volts power connection. They pull probably 30 watts, 40 watts, depending on how hard you want to like try to push them and mess with them. But it is the best learning opportunity to see what the behind the scenes of this mining industry looks like and kind of requires. You'll be able to plug that in. You'll connect it over Wi-Fi. Some of them will even have like Ethernet adapters if you prefer that. You then set up what I kind of skipped from presenting on today, all of the software for it. So these nodes or these Bitcoin nodes are a kind of a completely different separation from the mining side, but they are required somewhere in the world for these miners to actually be able to do what they are supposed to do. So these Bitcoin mining nodes, if I were to try to simplify what they are, think of it as a computer that has the entire Bitcoin system of code on it with the blockchain. And from a glossary perspective, the blockchain is essentially just a general ledger. It is every single transaction that has happened on this Bitcoin network. It is storing that. It is confirming and validating that. And then it also has a function where it is sending what I would call technically a block template, but it is essentially call it mining work to the actual computer. So these miners, these little pocket-sized devices essentially are connecting to the internet. You're entering what is another kind of glossary term here called a mining pool. Those mining pools are actually what require you not to run one of these nodes. The mining pool is connected to a node. It is receiving the information in the work from this node, and it is sending that to the miner itself. The miner then is essentially performing a ton of hashes, and that's where this computational power is kind of required. Like one of these smaller starting miners are not going to be generating tens or hundreds of dollars a day. They'll be lucky if they generate any money back, essentially, because there's two different ways to perform on them. But those miners are just communicating hashes or the work to these mining pools. These mining pools, if you then think about it, because you're now bringing all of these other kind of fancy terminologies into this, is that you plug a miner in, it sends computing information to this mining pool. The mining pool is essentially like a bank where it is going to be essentially responsible for all of that Bitcoin that you're mining. Well, it's actually going to the bank, and then the bank is responsible for paying you out for normally what is referred to as like your full share. So it's like if me and Joe here are contributing to a mining pool, we're pooling our computing power together. That means that this mining pool has a higher chance of mining and like earning this Bitcoin. Well, they're going to pay us 50-50 because we both contributed the same amount of work. But if I have one of these industrial miners and Joe still has one of the home miners, I'm going to get my portion of the share for that work while Joe will receive his. So hopefully that kind of answers, and I'm more than happy to do some follow-up. But to put a bow on it, I think that that is the probably best opportunity you can do, if it's something that you do want to engage in, is to purchase one of these smaller devices, plug them in at home, learn how these Bitcoin wallets are generated, how to store that Bitcoin securely, and how these pools work, how the nodes work, how the blockchain kind of works at full. So thank you, Joe, for the question there.
So I'll follow up on that. Let's take that next level stage. So if an individual wanted to go a step beyond that to something that might actually generate, you know, a few satoshis a day actually, and allocate something and get, say, one of these 3,000 watt or 5,000 watt, just a sole unit. Case in point, I'm on Alliant Energy, unfortunately, which is why I have a solar system to offset their rising costs, but I've got it built in with a surplus. So year to year, I'm giving back to Alliant basically $100 to $300 in surplus unused solar credits. Thank heavens the farm is Heartland, but is that a situation where, a person could go ahead and purchase one of these industrial ones, but is there access to that for the novice one to help with the setup and, software and all that standpoint to do that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll do a quick kind of summary of these steps that you could theoretically take on the hardware side, and then I'll dive a little bit more into some of the solar setups and how that could kind of, you could change your surplus instead of selling to use that excess there. So from a quick stage of this hardware, in a, call it, theoretical perfect world, it's like I could start off with this $100 device. It's not going to make me rich. It is mostly just a learning opportunity. I'm going to plug it in. I'm going to learn what this Bitcoin wallet that I need to generate is, and how to kind of secure that. I'm going to learn about these mining pools and how they're actually kind of responsible for sending me the Bitcoin. I'm going to learn about the blockchain, etc. What you could then theoretically do is take one of these industrial size miners, buy a used one, buy one that's not the most performant thing in the world at this point in time for a couple $100, and convert that power supply into something that can operate off of 110 volts. You get to see in real life the size of these, and again, they're not very big. They're, call it, 12 by 12 and maybe about 30 pounds. But just get to actually interact and dissect these. Hey, I could, modify the fans to be really quiet. I can modify the fans to actually be really loud with a ton of RPMs if I need to push it through an HVAC system. Learn maybe some of the 3D printing side of that, or find a contractor or a business that already offers pre-made 3D printing adapters and kits for them. And then ultimately kind of jump into that same industrial scale miner, but one that's one of like the later and greater ones, a lot more kind of cost involved into it. There's still that air versus hydro option, but then actually run that off of 240 volts. And then it all comes down to that electrical setup. On a residential / commercial side of it, it's not going to be, 8 or 5 or 10 cents a kilowatt hour, right? It's going to probably be higher. I know, like me personally, I believe my residential kilowatt hour charge is around like 15 or 16 cents. So how do you make that profitable? Well, Joe brought up a great point where he is generating electricity with his solar setup and solar array. And instead of essentially having an agreement where I'm going to sell that surplus of energy back to the grid for what is likely potentially lower than what he could just be using it
Zero.
for an application. Yeah, it's pennies on the dollar compared to what it's actually worth. And the opportunity for that is to find something that is going to essentially, generate this additional revenue for using that power. It's kind of that win-win. It's essentially then free power. So you're mining, besides the hardware cost, you're mining at 100% profitability. The only kind of edge cases to it, but it's 100% solvable, is just that, well, you're not going to have the excess solar to run 3,000 watts or 3 kilowatts for 24 hours straight. But great, that's probably not the goal at that point, right? It's just to burn this excess, generate revenue that is technically more than what I could sell it back to the grid for, and then hold on to this Bitcoin, right? If I need to, I can sell it the same day I'm earning it. But at least in my personal opinion, I'm kind of thinking of Bitcoin as it's this long run. It's only over a decade old. There's going to be so many additional kind of technology changes in the world that you're kind of setting yourself up for success. It's just another way to diversify your portfolio, another way to kind of fight inflation. So lastly, on that automation side that we talked about, is that you're not going to have essentially excess solar 24/7. Think of, as soon as the sun goes away, whether that's in the afternoon or night or a cloudy day, what you can do on that software side is the same thing that I do at that industrial scale, where it's just like you are setting up an automation where you're essentially on an inverter or a battery that is smart enough, reading what is available, and then able to, like a light switch, kind of do this binary mining where it's like I'm either going to be all on and just burn it up as fast as I can, or I'm going to turn it off. There's also even crazier things on this firmware side that I get really passionate about, where you can really tune and like fluctuate this computer to really be like a dynamic, flexible load, where it's like I'm not just going to burn up a couple thousand watts in the first hour and then have to turn it off for 12 hours. I'm going to like really just let this ride at like a couple hundred watts and get 12 hours worth of it. All really depends on exactly what the sun is doing that day, right? But you can really adapt to the curve as close and as tuned as possible.
Yeah, that's all great information. The unique opportunity, I think, with Alliant is this is a net metering system. So it 12-month uh, basically reset. So every month, what I take in, what I provide out, it doesn't matter if I'm making 100 kW during the
Yeah.
day and using 100 at night, it's a net zero. And it's on a monthly basis, but then it rolls at 12 months. So every March it resets to zero. So every month in, I get a running balance. And like right now, I know I've got like $120 surplus already, and it reset in March. So this last year, I was at a point where I knew I had a surplus in January. I really plugged in a resistance space heater in my shop and cranked it up to try and burn that excess off, because otherwise March 1st, Alliant Energy just it vanishes, goes to zero, and that credit's gone. So
Hmm.
I don't have to shut down um, when the solar isn't running, because it's just looking at it as an overall net plus minus. Now,
Yeah.
other grid operators have different codes and operate differently, and what you got into there would be really helpful for those.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think REC is monthly.
That's what I was told by Heartland over at my bin site anyway, is a monthly in out anyway, which is why I think within the Heartland system, we see more like hog buildings where they'll put in solar. That's a constant load for those buildings. They know to offset that, but not really any more than that from what I've heard. But they're cheaper than Alliant per kilowatt. So penny and a half a bushel for drying compared to Alliant versus Heartland Power.
Hmm. Interesting.
Any other questions? Been a good meeting so far. I don't want to keep you up too long, Lucas. I appreciate it.
No
Uh,
worries. I'm pretty
does
passionate about
anybody have any questions on the hotel comment he made early on? I guess I kind of understand it, but I was kind of curious if anybody else, the business model and that of simple mining, is that something you want to elaborate on a little bit or?
Yeah, I can add a little bit more context to that. So, it actually kind of spawned as a talking point due to a conversation that I just had last week at the New Hampton Rotary Club, where was this a similar conversation as today, less on the technical side. So I definitely enjoy this conversation so far. It was like, how is Simple Mining operating as a business, right? Like you guys are just deploying 40,000 computers and mining a bunch of Bitcoin. Like what happens if something happens to Bitcoin, et cetera, right? And that's kind of where like some of the risk is avoided to a certain degree because even though like I'm personally invested in it, I personally have these miners. If the price of like Bitcoin were to go away, you still have this power use as like a power portfolio. You still are going to have customers that are running these computers. So from that hotel aspect, what we're offering as like this service and product is that we are selling the hardware, these industrial size kind of computers that people from anywhere in the world can purchase, and then they will ultimately be operational at one of our data centers. And a lot of the times we're actually kind of ahead of the curve on that, where it's like we're purchasing that as inventory way ahead of time. We're deploying it there. And then it's what we refer to as like a turnkey solution. So the day that you were to purchase one of these from us, you're not waiting for shipping time. You're not waiting for this deployment time. You're able to just make that purchase. We confirm that we have it. And then we are setting this configuration up for you on like that mining pool side. But at the end of the day, our kind of mission from like Simple Mining side is we are going to host computers, no matter what essentially like that computer is, and just make it any easy as a couple of clicks of a button for anybody in the world to have that opportunity to mine Bitcoin. We have customers all over the globe, which is always really fascinating to see, especially as somebody that's from small town Iowa, somebody that kind of first started working in a retail location where, again, you're limited to customers that are within the state or even honestly closer, just an hour or two away. It's fascinating to see that anybody in the globe, especially like if we're being honest, I know that we may not love like some of the power pricing and stuff like that in Iowa, love or hate the renewable side of it, but there's countries all over the world that don't have stable grids. Their electricity is double or triple the price of ours. So being able to offer that opportunity to host these computers here in Iowa has always been really kind of fascinating to me and really exciting. So hopefully that provides a little bit more context.
Appreciate that. And one of the things we talked about in the past a little bit is you mentioned like the group, people working together. Would there be an opportunity for like a bunch of farmers that do, History of Ag Venture Alliance, Farmer Co-op working together? If we would team up and put in, could we create our own little co-op type deal?
Yeah, you can. We've first explored that even with like the Simple Mining company when we first started. Because at the end of the day, these computers are essentially competing against millions, if not hundreds of millions of other of the exact same computers all over the globe. Everybody is on that same kind of mission on this blockchain side. There's a new Bitcoin block that essentially on average happens about every 10 minutes. And the miners, without getting too complex on the software side, are getting like the transaction fees for those Bitcoin blocks that happen every 10 minutes. Every 4 years that changes. There's this halving event, and this halving event is what controls the supply of the Bitcoin. There's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoins that exist in the world. So those miners are fighting for that block reward every 10 minutes. So again, if you were running like one of these home miners at home and you were doing what is called or referred to as solo mining, you're not joining a pool of people, you're just doing it against yourself. You're really not going to earn anything. You've got a 1 in a billion chance a day, basically like almost like playing the Powerball, where your computer is trying to earn that against everybody's industrial setups, and it's very unlikely. Yet it has happened. So that's why there's a lot of popularity growing for these smaller home miners, because people have done the impossible, basically. But yeah, at the end of the day, no matter what computer, industrial or home, no matter what the computing power is, joining these pools is going to be the best way to kind of essentially like guarantee these like daily payouts. But for the original question, yeah, it's 100% possible to set up an Ag Ventures pool. And if one of the miners in this Ag Ventures fleet were to mine that block or kind of solve that block, your guys' name would like show up on the blockchain. We've got some fascinating kind of proof of that, and there's a lot more technical details that we can always kind of talk about in the future as well. That show that. Simple mining alone, we just crossed over about 30 of these Bitcoin blocks confirmed. What that allows us to do essentially too then is so like in this Bitcoin blockchain, what is referred to as like a mempool, our simple mining name shows up on the Bitcoin blockchain forever. That one of the miners at this company basically solved that block. So there's a lot of fascinating things behind it, not only from like the reward side of it and the actual Bitcoin that's captured, but even just like being able to stamp your name or company in like this Bitcoin blockchain.
All right, thanks for that. Anybody else got any questions? Or I got one final one, I guess, but I'm trying to decide if I shut the recording off for that one. But the rally against data centers and that legal wise, is there any concern with simple mining doing the Bitcoin and that? Are they affected by the same rules and that, or what's your thoughts on that versus the AI data centers?
Yeah, so it's definitely, especially here in Iowa too. There's a lot more concern for it, right? You're looking at gigantic kind of loads of power that is operating. Um, there is kind of that significant difference in the types of load, but it is definitely something that hasn't truly like affected us yet. It can affect on a stage of like growing the business from going from like 10 data centers to 20. Again, it's all going to be about that source of power and where we're doing it. Trying to just be as transparent as possible and give everybody an opportunity to see what those look like, to actually visit one of the facilities and see it as well. But there are concerns. Again, I do feel pretty confident that simple mining and like the Bitcoin mining side of it does play a little bit stronger than the actual AI side of things. And that is if we were to just simplify this and talk about like a firm load versus a curtailable load. Same thing would probably go for the usage of like any water or liquids. A lot of those AI data centers in Texas or any part of the world may be using like actual real water because they don't have to worry about it ever freezing. They're using, of course, they're much bigger data centers, so they're using a lot more of it. Versus here in Iowa at our data centers, we're using a glycol mix. It's a closed loop system. It's all like EPA friendly. You may have some of those like leaks here and there, but it's not like what has probably been reported online or in news channels where, in Iowa here, we're wasting 500 plus thousand gallons of water a single day. It's just not the case.
All right.
Mhm.
Any other questions now, or do you have a contact page or care to share your contact if anybody wants to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find more about simple mining at simplemining.io. Not to be confused with like a .com. It's just a .io. You could also just do a normal Google search for simple mining. For me, if anybody has any technical questions, wants to talk more about this hardware or the software or anything else that we may have missed tonight, feel free to reach me at my email, which is Lucas, Lucas, at simplemining.io.
All righty. Thanks for that.